Everybody, welcome back to Patriot to the Core podcast. I'm your host, Thad Forrester, and this is episode number 51. I was just scrolling through iTunes, and first of all, there are a ton of podcasts out there in every category, it seems like. So definitely in our genre. So the fact that you're listening, I guess, says a lot about you. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate that, because there's a lot of things vying for your time, and also there's just a lot of podcasts to pick from if you're just someone who loves podcasts. I have 25 ratings now, so wow. Definitely nothing to brag about, but also I appreciate all those 5-star ratings, because they're all, so far they're all 5 stars. I'm guessing probably know most of you. I don't know, but thank you for rating. If you haven't, it's very easy to do so now, especially on the podcast app if you are an Apple user, or you can just go into iTunes and do it, from a desktop. But your app is really easy to rate. I mean, you can scroll down now and just hit the 5 stars, and you can tap to write a review, which is even better. So appreciate the recent review I got as well. But now I want to get into our guest today, Rich Brown. He is a former Marine. He retired as a Chief Warrant Officer 3 in 2012. And Rich is a founding member of American Warrior Society. It's basically an online community for the modern day warrior monk. That's what they say. So they've just got a ton of different articles and all types of various material in here, from fitness to medical to combatives to tactics to firearms to there's some CIA stuff. And they also have a podcast, the American Warrior Show, and it's a great podcast. It's a weekly one that I found several months ago. So I really appreciate Rich coming on today. We talk about his military career in the Marines. He left and came back. He's also a police officer. He worked as a corrections officer, did all kinds of stuff, and now he has his hands in a few things right now. He also works with some nonprofits to help get people jobs that are immigrants or trying to immigrate here. Speaking of, some of them are coming from those countries that President Trump supposedly talked about that got a lot of backlash just a few weeks ago in January. So we talk about that, and Rich has some really good insight based on his background, based on his business experiences and the military, and the people he's worked with. So we go into this hot topic, and I appreciate how he articulated his feelings, and I think it was very good. I could not have said it better. There's no way I could have. But he did a great job. And so I will warn you, if you have kids listening in the car or kids around, my show is usually pretty clean. There is a certain 4-letter word that is used a few times. Just want to let you know that you may want to listen to it some other time or listen to it. Well, it's up to you. Just giving you a warning. This one does have explicit content, but it's only because of one particular word that is used that apparently President Trump used as well. So there's your warning. Had a great time with Rich. He's a great guy, a great American. So Rich, you're a founding member of and the COO of American Warrior Society. What is AWS, I guess you refer to it as?
Yeah, we refer to it as AWS, the American Warrior Society. We call it, an online university for the warrior monk. It's a place that self-defense minded Americans or people from all around the world can come and learn anything and everything to keep them and their families safe.
What's the background with the business?
Well, the backstory was, my business partner, Mike Seeklander, and I, we met in the Marine Corps. We met actually in Desert Storm, and when we got out of the Marine Corps together in 1995 to become police officers in Tennessee, people kept asking us, can you teach us this? Can you teach us that? So we started a training company in 95 and started teaching civilians and SWAT teams and some other stuff, and that led into a law enforcement career. So really, I see it as a new extension of that same business. We're just using a different medium, the medium of the internet, if that makes any sense.
What makes it up? Like, is there a membership, or do you write articles, or how does it all work?
That's a great question. When we talked about probably 4 or 5 years ago, when we talked about this idea and taking our initial training company and putting it in a virtual space, it was kind of like, well, how do we do that? Because the way people were doing it was it would be free content, but you would have all these pop-ups and click-throughs, and it was really cluttered and not a good experience. And you didn't always know if the person writing the article had the reader's best interests at stake, meaning if Remington is sponsoring this pop-up ad for thousands of dollars, are you really getting the author's honest feedback about a Remington firearm? Do you see what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So what we wanted to do, Thad, was be a place where we're behind the paywall. There's no advertisement inside there. It's all our 100% opinions and the opinions of our writers. We have former Marines, former MARSOC guys, former SOCOM guys, lots of law enforcement people writing for the site, some former CIA folks writing for the site. So it's not just mine and Mike's site. It's a collaboration, a community of self-defense experts that are writing and producing content for the site.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the site. I've just found your podcast a few months ago, so I listened to it weekly. But are any of yours on there? Do you write articles for it too?
Yeah, I write probably, 20-25% of the articles on there are mine. And that's the thing, as podcasters, we've got a show also, Thad, as you're well aware of, the American Warrior Show, which is kind of a vehicle to let people know that we're out there, as well as sharing some information that might, keep people safe. And the response to it's been really good. I think we just aired our 130th episode. So hopefully your listeners can check it out.
Yeah, I'll definitely have a link to it. And you've got a lot more reviews than I've got. You definitely have more episodes than I've got, so y'all keep up the good work. And I know you and Mike kind of do it together. So you have a guest sometimes you don't. In fact, recently you were talking about you don't really have a sponsor when it comes to shooting. Is that right for you?
No, Mike is the champion. It's funny. When we started in 1992, I went to this really high-speed shooting course up at Quantico, and I came back, and in 1992, we started training together, and we would go to the range on the weekend, like on Saturday mornings, and we'd reload all Saturday afternoon. And, I've been married for 30 years, Dad, so all this time Mike would be single or maybe have a girlfriend, and so my attention was to my growing family and not so much being a competitive shooter. So where we might have started off at the similar baseline, Mike definitely took off and is now, a multi-time national champion shooter. And, he's a full-time sponsored shooter, man. That's what he does.
Yeah, it seems that way. And he's on TV. Outdoor Channel?
Outdoor Channel has got a TV show with Mike Janich, who's another amazing American. You might want to get him on your show sometime. But Mike Seeklander and we attend Mike Janich's awesome martial blade camp every year, where we do a little edge weapons training in the beautiful town of Keystone, Colorado. But yeah, man, Mike and we've been B-Fries, best friends, 27 years now, and we've deployed together, been in combat together, and been cops together, and special operations officers together, and done a lot of stuff together. And somehow we're still hanging out together.
Maybe it's because you're separated by distance. Maybe that's it, right?
Yeah, that probably is, because he does not live in the same town that I do anymore.
Well, you touched on this a little earlier, but will you go into your background and what qualifies you to be, for the American Warrior Society and for the how you got into that business and training people to shoot and for self-defense?
Yeah, and to do that, I probably need to go back to like 1980 or 81 when I was 10 years old. We were living in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was a minority in my class there in Memphis, and I got there was some bullying from some of the other students that evidently didn't like a white kid in the class. And so my parents put me in. They couldn't afford to move us to a private school, so they put us in a martial arts dojo. And not that I learned any secret ninja technique, because that certainly didn't happen, Thad, but what I did learn was, I became empowered, and it taught me that I could stand up for myself, and learn some self-direction, self-discipline things, those intangible things. And it started me down that path of, realizing that there are other people that probably feel the same way I do, powerless in their circumstances. So I continued this life in the martial arts, and then moved into the military. I wanted to serve my country, and I became a Marine infantryman. And I remember, Thad, when I told my dad I was going to join the Marine Corps, I was already married. I got married a month out of high school. So, but I did the cowardly thing that I waited till he was in Canada. and then I called him and said, Dad, I joined the Marine Corps. And he was, oh my God, he was so upset. He's like, well, at least tell me you're going to learn a skill, son. I'm like, no, I'm going to be in the infantry. And, but long story short, that's all I wanted to do from the time I was a kid. Once I got into the martial arts and started discovering what the military was all about, I just thought, man, why would anybody want to do anything but? I mean, it's almost like you never have to grow up. You get to run through the woods and shoot stuff and blow stuff up, and they pay you to do it. How awesome is that?
You were looking for a fight. Sounds like.
I wouldn't say that, but more to protect people, and that's the way I see our military. They're protectors first. Some of the stuff may superficially look like we go into, they call it fishing, fighting in other people's houses, but some of it may look like that, but in reality, it's really to keep people safe. So I deployed, 3 times, went to 20-something different countries within my first 3 years in the Marine Corps. And I said, man, my wife's going to leave me if I don't get out of this stuff and do something else. So I went to be instructor at the School of Infantry, and I taught patrolling and, tactics, weapons, everything, you name it, for 3 years. And then Mike and I got out. And we moved back to, like I said, to my home in Tennessee, and we started training folks, and we got jobs as police officers, and that led to, did that for 3 years, did corrections as well. And then I think I was so dissatisfied with being a police officer, it was not what I thought it was going to be, that I decided I was going to go back to the Marines. And
Rich, what was it about the police officer that was, because this is back in the 90s, is that right?
Yeah.
Mid early 90s. So what was it that you didn't like about it?
Oh, I was afraid you were just going to ask me that. So
we don't have to go there if you don't want.
No. I went to the Corrections Academy first with the Knox County Sheriff's Department, and I was the president of my class and thought, okay, man, this is pretty good. I like this. Got on with their special operations team, which is amazing. And then I was still training this Maryville City's SWAT team, and they asked me to come on over there. So it was going to be a pay raise, and I wanted to get on the road anyway. So they sent me to the police academy, and I go there, and I'm the honor graduate, president of my class. I get the director's award. I'm like, man, this seems to be in my blood. This is what I was made to do. But I got in there, and I don't mind the going against the bad guys and doing that kind of stuff. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with writing reports and doing everything above board and all that kind of stuff. But the problem was the administration was horrible. And they created so many roadblocks to doing your job that it was unbelievable. For instance, I would get called in on my day off, and the chief of police he wants to see you. He's concerned about something. So he'd had me waiting in the hallway for hours. And then I would get brought in did you assist Officer so-and-so last night? I'm like, yes, sir, I did. He was in a fight. I'm like, okay. You don't ever do that. If you see a fight with another officer, and I don't care if he's getting his brains beat out with a tire iron, you don't help him unless your superior tells you to. And I'm like, I don't like the sound of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, and then there was a lot of infighting between the county and the city, and I think this is common throughout the country, where literally the chief of police told me that he was at war with the sheriff, and I shouldn't be talking to sheriff's deputies, which a lot of the sheriff's deputies were my friends from the Marine Corps Reserve Unit, because when I got out of the active duty Marine Corps, I stayed in the reserves. And so I couldn't handle that. And it didn't jive with my moral compass, my ethos, my ethics, none of it. And I knew it was time to do something else.
Yeah, I can't blame you there. So this was local issues, not coming down from the federal government.
Oh, no. These were all local petty infighting. And I think the final straw was I was in court one day and I kept looking at all the bailiffs and they were really old, Thad. I mean, they were probably in their 80s. And one day it dawned on me who they were. I'd seen their faces before, and they were the retired chiefs of police from my department. And so I walked over there to one of the bailiffs while the court adjourned, and I said, "Sir, why are you working here? Aren't you, Chief so-and-so?" And he looked up at me, and he said, "Son, I got to eat." And I went, wow. So I started looking into the retirement system for state employees, and I thought, man, it was dismal. And I knew, of course, the retirement system I had just left after my 6 years on active duty. And I took it to my wife. I said, "I'm miserable." She goes, "Well, why don't you go back in the Marine Corps? That seems like the only time you were happy." So that's what we did.
I'd wonder why you got out and went back. So at that time, well, you'd already been to, I guess we back up a minute. What about Desert Storm and Desert Shield? And what was your role there?
When I joined the Marine Corps, like I said, I was in the infantry, but I remember they told me, "You're going to be a mortarman." I'm like, "What in the world is a mortarman?" So I learned that as an 0341, it's a indirect fire. We fired an 81 millimeter mortar or a 60 millimeter mortar. We can fire over mountains and stuff to hit the enemy. Well, when I checked into my first unit, they didn't need any mortarmen, and they looked at my scores, and I was a pretty smart guy, so they said, "We're going to put you in the Fire Direction Center." So I worked in the Fire Direction Center, which is a fancy way of saying we control where the forward observer calls in and says, "I have tanks in the open." He tells us where we are. We plot it all out. We do the math that allows the gunners to put the elevation and deflection on the mortar tube so they can accurately impact the enemy. So I did that, but then Desert Storm broke out, and my company commander said, "I don't want Lance Corporal Brown to be in your FDC. I want him to be my basically part of the battalion's fire support cell." So we would so it was a group of guys. It was an artillery officer, myself, and then the pilot, the Marine captain, who was normally a helicopter pilot, but for the war he was assigned to us to control the air. And we dropped a lot of ordnance on the enemy during the ground war. And matter of fact, about almost this time, 27 years ago. Now, we were actually one of the units that highway of death coming out of Kuwait City, leading in back into Iraq, that miles and miles of carnage. Part of our fire support cell had some to do with that.
What's the difference between your role? You talk about dropping a lot of ordnance. Mm-hmm. Can you compare the role that you were in versus a JTAC?
Yeah, a JTAC, I think it stands for Joint Terminal Air Controller. And that was really what our FAC, our forward air controller, the pilot, would have been responsible for. And then he had an enlisted Marine that was assigned to him, and they handled, we called it back then the wedding cake. That all the I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, Thad.
No, I haven't.
The planes would be, flying extremely high altitude. They're circling in these big arches, and then as they start getting closer on their fuel or whatever, they would start coming closer and closer to us. So it's like an inverted wedding cake. The tighter the circle, the closer to the ground they got. And then we would call them in, and then when they would go Winchester on their ammo and they'd roll out, another one would roll in from the wedding cake and start doing runs for us. But my job was to coordinate artillery fires in conjunction with what our air assets were providing.
Okay. What type of aircraft were these?
I forget which Marine Air Wing was supporting us, but they were mostly, AV-8s and F-18s, and okay. we also had something interesting back then that they don't have now, and that's the OV-10 Broncos, which was a reconnaissance and observation aircraft that was actually a propeller. They were used extensively in Vietnam, and they were still around during Desert Storm, and So we would have them kind of lumbering over the battlefield, and they were giving us real-time reports on what they were seeing. So it was really provided a degree of lethality to what we were doing.
You're one of the few Desert Storm guys that I've had on the show. What did you go to Iraq or Afghanistan?
No, I didn't, and that's an interesting segue real quick. When I came back on active duty, that the only way I could keep my rank, I had picked up staff sergeant in the reserves. And like I said, I wanted to come back on active duty. So Mike and I, my business partner, Mike Seeklander, and I had toyed with going in the SF, and we talked to a recruiter, and I remember taking the paperwork home, and I had gotten a slot to go to selection at, I think it was Fort Bragg, SFAS, Special Forces Assessment Selection. And I come home to have my wife sign that 1966 page whatever statement that she acknowledges her husband's joining the SF. She broke out into tears, and that was the end of that. But to keep my rank to go back in the Marine Corps, the only way I could do it was to come on recruiting. If I tried to go back into the infantry, they were literally going to make me a lance corporal again, which is like an E3, and I was an E6. Or you could help out the mission and become a canvassing recruiter right in your own hometown. So it sounded like a pretty good deal. But the problem, Thad, was on 9/11, I had become a career recruiter by then, and you can't, once you're in, you can never get out. And then I remember I became an officer later in my years, and the commandant of the Marine Corps came to Parris Island, where I was stationed at, and said, and told the auditorium full of Marine Corps officers, and no enlisted Marines present. He said, "Let me tell you something, gents. You go home tonight and you tell your wives you're getting in a fight. Then I want you to get with your monitors and decide when and where you're going. But everyone in this auditorium's going." So I call my wife. I'm going. And I start looking at these. They had these IA billets, which were like quick fills, like, we need somebody in the next 30 days. You're going to be here for 7 months, and you're coming right back. So I'm like, okay, cool. That's what we're going to do. And so I call my monitor, and he's like, "You can't be calling me. Did you not get the commandant's white letter that came out today?" I said, "I just talked to him yesterday. He told us all we got to call our monitors." He's like, "No, it's coming out, buddy. Just hang loose." And he hung the phone up. 5 minutes later, a letter came out and said, "The commandant's been telling a lot of Marine Corps officers that they're all going to the fight, unless you're a 4810 and one other MOS," which is, what MOS is, right, Thad?
Yeah, it's your
job,
right?
Right?
It's your job, but
yeah. Well, my job was a recruiting operations officer, so there was only 16 of us in the entire Marine Corps, in the entire Department of Defense, for that matter, and said, if you're a 4810, you cannot go. Your commanders will not endorse it. Nobody will approve it. You're staying right where you're at. So I could not leave the continental United States, which is sad and odd.
Here's what I'm thinking. So just correct me if I'm wrong, Rich. In Desert Storm and Shield, it wasn't that long. We kicked some butt over there.
Oh yeah.
And then now this war, we were attacked like we were. And so everybody was so fired up, and you had young kids, you had adults, all type of people saying, "I'm joining now because of this," and just such a different war.
Yeah, it is a completely different war. And almost all my friends, of course, the problem with being a recruiting operations officer and not being able to go to the fight is you got to sit on the sidelines and watch your friends go and fight and die. And, three young men that I put in the Marine Corps, came home and are buried in and around where I live today. So it's kind of like I live in a county full of ghosts, if you will, which is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I have often wondered if the guy who recruited my brother knew that he was killed. And I've wondered that for many years. And then my wife was at the grocery store at a different grocery store than she normally shops at in a different town. And this guy saw the JAG 28 sticker on the van. This is just like back in the summer or fall.
Oh, wow.
And he walked up to her and said, "Did you know Mark Forrester?" Because I recruited him. She said, "Well, yeah, I'm his sister-in-law." And this was a guy that had recruited him in Tuscaloosa. And so he did know about it, and he had talked about the effect it had on him and how he, couldn't work for a few days. What kind of effects did it have on you when you found out some of the guys you recruited were killed?
It's heartbreaking to this day. And I realize that, Marines die, there's a saying, that's what we do, service we provided this country, but I never knew them as Marines, if that makes sense. I knew them as young men in high school in this youthful moment of their life. And, I have two sons, and I think I kind of saw them as surrogate sons. So knowing that I had a hand in, the tragedy that befell them and their family is a burden I will live with forever.
Yeah. Wow, that's tough.
It is, and I know that some of them got killed on a reenlistment. One of them did, and so it's not like, well, they had already, their first enlistment had came up and they had chose to stay in that life. But that kind of like your brother Thad, one of them, let's see, two of them had no children. And they left, no one behind really. And I think what led you to write your brother's story is you don't want their memory to fade. And, it's just, especially here in Tennessee where I live, one of the highways is named after a young man I put in the Marine Corps. There's a bridge named after another one. And I go down those roads to this day. So it's inescapable.
Yeah,
and it should be. And it should be. I should never forget them, and I don't want to.
Yeah. Your role is needed as well, and there's every job. I feel like I haven't served, Rich, but every job is important, and so you've been in the fight, and then been the one putting the guys in the fight. So you've would you say that's two extremes in the profession?
It is, and something I never thought I would do. I am much more comfortable breaking things and blowing stuff up than I was talking to high schoolers. So what's interesting, I didn't necessarily follow the script when it came to recruiting. So this is one thing that I feel good about, is I was always honest and upfront. I'm like, look, man, if you're looking for college money and so a really sweet gig, Marine Corps ain't for you. If you want to stand in the mud and suffer with your brothers and potentially put a rifle in somebody's face one day, then maybe the Marine Corps is for you. It requires a weird personality to serve in the Marine Corps, and I'm aware of that. And I was always honest with the young men and women I put in. But it is two extremes, and I turned out to have a knack for it. I was a very successful recruiter, but I was a very honest recruiter. I didn't sugarcoat anything to the parents or anybody. And at the time I was a recruiter, you got to remember, Thad, the war wasn't going on. Matter of fact, the morning 9/11 happened, I had just turned over a recruiting substation that I ran here in rural Tennessee, and I was going up to run recruiting operations for the entire state of Tennessee. So recruiting in this wartime was not something that I did. Even though I was recruiting at a time of relative peace in the late 90s, I still wanted to be intellectually honest with these young men and women. I owed it to them and their families to do so.
Sure. What all did you learn in the Marine Corps?
That
could be pretty broad, but I'm really curious some things that stand out to you, whether it's skills or it's other lifelong principles.
Well, that's a great question. And, the things I learned in the Marine Corps, I've been able to translate to this business, the American Warrior Society, whether it's a little bit of sales that I learned in recruiting, and as well as all of the self-defense related skills. But even still, that's not necessarily the case. And I'll make a brief segue here. When it's hard to translate some of the warfighter skills into the self-defense community of the lawful use and context of self-defense here in America. Because if I'm teaching an ambush technique to a group of Marines, we're going to kill everything that's in our kill zone. That's why they call it a kill zone, right? Mm-hmm. And in order to secretly patrol to a position that puts us at a tactical advantage, where we wait and then stealthily execute a predetermined ambush, is premeditated murder. So you can't necessarily teach that to civilians in the context of lawful self-defense.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So I never really thought about it that way until years later. Like, wow, that was really what I was teaching. People had to commit premeditated murder most of the time. But I think a lot of being a police officer is applicable. But the Marine Corps, it's all the intangibles: poise, courage, self-confidence, self-direction, self-discipline, all the things that I didn't necessarily get in college later on, I got in the Marine Corps, if that makes any sense at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Doing anything for the guy beside you.
Yeah, all of my, like I told you before we came on air, my brother's a Marine, my cousins are Marines, all my friends are Marines. You get in that community, and it's easy to go, well, there's an automatic trust there. You know what I'm saying, Thad? I mean, with a civilian, I'm like, I don't really have a whole lot in common with you, and I don't know that you've ever been through the same crucible that I've been through. Yeah. But with a Marine, you're a known commodity. Oh, okay, yeah. Would you go to Parris Island? Okay, yeah, 13 weeks. Yeah, I get that. And we have a common bond, and there's a common trust that we can that I have with him probably right out of the gate that I don't have with most Americans. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of a story in World War I. There was an American nurse, and she was in a field hospital in France, and all the men at the time, it was fashionable to have a mustache. Well, the Americans couldn't have a mustache. So she's looking down the line of the wounded soldiers, and she sees this one guy without a mustache, and she says, "Oh my goodness, you must be an American." And he says, "No, ma'am, I'm a Marine." And I always chuckle at that because it reminds me of how a lot of Marines kind of think of it,
Yeah, I haven't heard that. To make sure we have time on your show, you often talk about current events.
Yep.
And recently, a hot topic. Now for the listeners, that maybe you don't know that. Sometimes I record these episodes pretty far in advance. I'm a part timer, and they release every 2 weeks, so it's hard for me to stay as current as you do. As you and Mike do with your show. Mm-hmm. I do occasionally, but a hot topic in December, or no, it was January, I guess. Yeah, with President Trump's comments about Haiti and some other countries in Africa, maybe some other countries in South America. I'm not sure, but got a lot of attention, and you had an impromptu session on your episode a few weeks ago about it. I'd like to elaborate on why you feel the way you do about what he said about the shithole countries, and just some of your background, because you have a different perspective than most people have on it, I believe, because of your background.
Yeah, sure, and I did go on a little rant, and I wasn't sure how that was going to be received, but I've got a lot of all positive comments about it.
Mm-hmm. I took it.
Well, I appreciated that. I wasn't sure how you did take that, but it reminds me of this thing that President John Quincy Adams once said. He said, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes and our inclinations or the dictates of our passions." Do you know this quote?
No, I don't.
Yeah, he says they cannot alter the state of facts and the evidence. So I would submit that the evidence clearly indicates that most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa is what we're really talking about, because that's what President Trump was talking about, that they're shitholes. And let me get this out of the way up front. I love Africa. I've been to Africa. It's a beautiful continent. My brother and I both served our country in Africa. I have absolutely found the people in Africa to be warm and engaging. They invited me into their homes, into their lives. They fed us. They shared with us what they had. And you know what? That I repay that kindness by hiring Africans that have immigrated to our country. And like I said in the podcast, I've partnered with a 501c3 company here in Tennessee that helps to bridge the gap between the immigration policies, the people, and us as employers. We love our African team members. Love them. They're amazing people, and they're going to be amazing Americans. They are the future of our country. And I truly believe that. And if you ask them, Chad, that they will tell you they're fleeing a shithole. And if it was so awesome there, then why did they strive and struggle for years? And if you hear the stories of what it took to get them from there to here, it would make you weep. So to lie to their face and act as if their country that they suffered in was some misunderstood paradise, it's, to me, intellectually disingenuous. We need to be responsible, but we also need to call a spade a spade. So I went on my little rant, and the other thing that it reminded me of, and as I've thought back on those comments that I made in the heat of the moment, was, I'm from Scots-Irish folk here in East Tennessee, and I went back to Scotland last summer, spent 10 days there, loved, going back to the homeland was important to me, but when my ancestors left Scotland for Northern Ireland and then Northern Ireland on into America, they were fleeing a shithole. And you know why it was a shithole? Because, for a variety of reasons, but specifically when they left Northern Ireland, there were some terrible reasons why. Incredible poverty. They came to Ulster Plantation because they were fleeing from all the crap that was going on in Scotland, but more importantly, there was some test acts by Queen Anne, I think, in Northern Ireland. She outlawed their religion. They couldn't hold off. They couldn't get married. They couldn't go to school. They put tariffs on flax that they were growing, and then they switched to wool, and they taxed the heck out of that. And finally, they said, we've had enough of this, and they came here, and we've turned into great Americans. And that's exactly what's happened in Africa. And one of the things I mentioned, Thad, was the metric that I prefer to use is the same one the United Nations uses, and that's the happiness index, right? Have you heard about that?
I have.
And your listeners can go online. You can download the report. It's only 38 pages, the part of the report that discusses Africa. It's written by 4 amazingly brilliant Africans using African governmental data and social surveys of real Africans, how they feel. And they're miserable. They're fleeing. And as the report says, the youth are voting with their feet. And if you want to talk about how they became shitholes, we can certainly talk about that. But I just think that there's too much emphasis on feelings instead of facts right now in this country, and I find it disturbing. Whether it's any of these social things that we see going on right now in the country, when you try to look at it objectively, like, wait a minute, this isn't really true, but it's how somebody feels, and it creates a narrative that becomes self-perpetuating.
Rich, what was the very first thought that you had when you heard that President Trump said or may have said that comment?
Actually, it was a non-event for me because I think, he lacks tact and candor. I got it. Okay. But, I'm not going to, let's be honest here. I wish somebody would take his doggone Twitter away from him. I think it could be harmful and destructive. But I thought in this case, he was just being honest. I didn't see any racial animus to the remark at all. But again, I think that for those out there that are looking for that, all of a sudden it feeds right into their confirmation bias. Oh my gosh, look at this, look what he said. And it became some racially charged comment that I don't think it was at all. It's just by any metric you want to judge sub-Saharan Africa by, their governments have put them in a position where they're miserable and they're fleeing. And but what's even more destructive is our immigration policies towards sub-Saharan Africa. We are pulling the best and the brightest away from that country, and I didn't really realize that until I looked into it a little deeper. The percentage of the immigrants we're getting are very highly educated. Sub-Saharan
Africans. I didn't know
Africans.
that. Huh.
Oh my gosh. They are, and I read somewhere it's like 67% of them hold a bachelor's degree or higher, which of course is way more than natural born U.S. citizens hold higher education. So, but it's an intellectual drain on the continent if you really think about it.
Well, like you, when I first heard it, I thought, okay, well, that's probably true. And I haven't been to any of those countries, so my thinking is a little different. I don't want to act like that, I know everything because of somebody else said it. But I definitely did not ever think, oh, wait a minute, okay, what race are these people? What color are these people? Never even crossed my mind.
Me either.
It's the country. And I also thought how fortunate we are to have been born and live in this great country that we do. I mean, man, we're so fortunate. And I guess you can say that a lot with a lot more power than me because you've been all over the world.
Well, I think all Americans are, they're certainly have the right to their opinions. I would kid up tomorrow and fight to defend anyone's freedom to say whatever they want. And, that I'm fine with that. But just because you're saying it doesn't make it a fact. Just because you feel it doesn't make it a fact. But you're certainly say what's on your mind. The problem, I started reading about sub-Saharan Africa probably 15 to 20 years ago. I became interested in the Rwandan genocide. I remember, gosh, that was been 24 years ago. And I read everything I could read on that. And that led me into reading about Rhodesia becoming Zimbabwe. And then I followed the economic collapse there in Zimbabwe under the rule of the dictatorship, rather, of Robert Mugabe. And I think a lot of Americans don't really know anything about Africa, that part of the world.
Yeah.
But they have these uninformed opinions that they hold as fact. And that's the problem I have. Rhodesia, I have 2 African dollar bills. One is a $2 Rhodesian note, and at the time it was issued in 1975, I think the note is, it was worth more than the U.S. dollar. The Rhodesian dollar, Rhodesia was called the Switzerland of Africa for a reason. It was feeding the continent. It had all these riches, and it was poised for greatness. And then the winds of change, blew through Africa in the 1960s, and the British government and all these Western powers completely gave up their colonies. So these African countries, when they gained independence, they inherited little to no debt and amazing infrastructures. And they remained so until the 80s, when they started gobbling up money from foreign banks. And the money that was given to them was to build roads and ports and power plants, anything and everything that we could do to speed up economic development, and create capacity so that they could ultimately repay the loan. It wasn't necessarily complete, just some sort of altruism, I guess is the word I'm looking for. It's like, hey, man, if we give them the money, they're going to be able to build this stuff and they're going to be able to repay us. Sounds great, but that's not what happened. Why? Governmental corruption, natural disasters, wars, bad policy, greed, some bad luck, but it made it impossible for them to pay the debts. And what we ended up doing? Western countries, well, we don't want to look like the bad guy. We're crippling these poor sub-Saharan African countries with debt to repay these rich countries. So in the 2000s, we did this debt forgiveness. And if you remember, U2's Bono and other NGOs and rock stars were out there, let's forgive all this, because the bottom line was these loans that were taken out were only benefiting these dictators and their close families, So we completely relieved them of their debt over the past, one by one over the past 15 years. There's been 30 African countries that have seen complete debt forgiveness. Wow. And if you say, well, how has that worked out? I mean, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that the West, people like me and you, through our taxes, we've ate that. And did it work? And I would submit that if happiness and economic progress and education, nutrition, social justice, basic human services and infrastructure is any sort of metric to whether there was a success or not, then I would say the answer is no. The people are not happy. They don't have those basic things, and thus, it reflects in the metrics that the UN studies, and that's why I'm comfortable saying they're shitholes. And it has nothing to do with the people. It has to do with the governments that they suffer under. And it's not about race. And I'm so sad that there's a segment of America that would make it that way. And I would say to them, go out and hire a Burundian like I have. two Burundians. They're amazing people, and their country is 154 of the 155 countries. And they're just
you're talking about the happiness
the happiness index, right?
Wow.
So it's like, and these are wonderful people. Wonderful people. Get to know them, and they will tell you the stories of how they fled and what they ran away from, and ask them if they left a paradise back home and on their continent. No, they did not. Sorry, I started ranting again. I apologize.
I really wanted your input here, because I what you said a few weeks ago, off the cuff, I guess, I really agreed with it. But I haven't been there, I haven't done that, but I wanted your input because of your background, and so appreciate that. My knowledge of Africa, at least growing up, was you remember the We Are the World, the Michael Jackson, all them, the song, the Ethiopian kid starving. That's what I knew about Africa at that time in the 80s.
Yeah, somebody turned me on to the writings of an author named Peter. I think his name was Peter Godwin. Peter was a white Rhodesian, and he lives here in New York now. He's one of those awesome Americans that we got from sub-Saharan Africa, and he wrote some amazing things about being a white former colonist growing up in sub-Saharan Africa that I thought was really good, just a really good human story, and he looked at it from all angles. And I got hooked on some of his writings and some of the other ones. And like I said, I've been fascinated by this, and I love hiring men and women from that part of the world. They're amazing. But why do we have to be so offended, I guess, by Trump's poor use of words? But again, it's like, by any metric, tell me there's something else.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it. Haiti's another example.
Right.
And if we're using and you've probably heard this stat, I think a couple of people have talked about it, the same island that has Haiti, which is number, I think, 45 on the 155 countries, on the same island is the Dominican Republic. Mm-hmm. And the Dominican Republic is doing incredible things. And it's the same people that live in Dominican Republic live in Haiti. I mean, they're the same brown people, if you want to label it that. And they're incredibly prosperous. So it has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with the country and the governmental policies that have made the Dominican Republic very successful, and Haiti not so much.
Who was the guy again, Peter, that lives in New York?
Peter Godwin. And, growing up, I remember my grandfather was he would buy produce and then truck it into East Tennessee, and we would sell it. And we would go to these fields, and I would see these men and women just working under the hot sun, and they were just wonderful people to me, as a young kid running through the watermelon fields and the what else was he getting? The cantaloupes and stuff. And they were just so warm and friendly to me, and they were picking peaches, and they would help me. I would help grade them on the assembly line, and they were just loved me as a little kid. And my mama was like, they're Haitians. So I grew up thinking the Haitian people are I want to go to Haiti. I want to be a Haitian when I grew up. These are just amazing people. And then to see how they have to suffer down there, because of their country is terrible. But let's be honest about what it is down there.
Well, I wanted to jump over to another topic before we need to wrap it up, Rich. What
Sure.
about, let's get into something that's right up your alley. Maybe something easy like your everyday carry. I'm sure you've talked about this 100 times, on your show and your site. But since I'm new to you and your business, I'm curious to know what you recommend or what you carry, or at least some of it.
The best thing I carry with me is what's between my ears. And I know that I don't know if you've heard General Mattis. He said that the most important 6 inches on the battle space is the 6 inches between your ears, and he's absolutely right. You can carry all the tools in the world, but if you don't have the mind to employ them, they're absolutely useless. But I know people like to talk about gizmos and gadgets, but I would start with that, the correct mindset. But beyond that, I carry a Glock 19. It's got a red dot sight on it because I'm getting older and I don't see as good as I used to, and acquiring a clear front sight with my middle-aged eyes is a little tough. So I got that red dot, and that does well for me. But Glock 19, it's got a TLR 6 on it, which is a little weapon-mounted light that shines a light and a laser. Because people that carry a gun and they don't have some sort of light to illuminate the threat, or what they perceive to be a threat, is scary to me. We're responsible for every round we fire, especially in a defensive context. So I carry a flashlight as well because sometimes I want to see things without pointing my pistol at them, right? I carry an edged weapon, but again, I train with edged weapons, and again, you should probably have Michael Janich on your show if you can get him on. He can talk all day about edged weapons and why they're so important. And beyond that, really, I don't carry a whole lot of stuff. It's a flashlight, it's a light, a flashlight, an edged weapon, a firearm, and I have a little thing of pepper spray on my keychain because I've used pepper spray, and all your listeners should have pepper spray. If you're not comfortable with firearms, then don't go with that. But a can of pepper spray, that will cure almost anything. I've had it been effective on dozens of people. Never seen it personally for me not be effective. So it is a great equalizer.
Good to know. What about like you're dressed up? Like let's say church or a wedding, and you have on a tucked in shirt. What's the best way to carry a weapon, specifically a firearm or a knife, concealed?
Great question. I believe in sticking to one, we call them family of guns. So I have a Glock 26, which is the subcompact, a Glock 19, which is the compact, and the 17, which is the full-size variant. But with one holster, all three of those firearms will fit into it, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Shoot, okay. I got a few Glocks myself. I hadn't even tried the different holsters.
Yeah, so that is the amazing thing. You can buy one holster and have all three guns fit in it. But I will often, if I'm wearing a suit, I'll carry my Glock 26, the subcompact, and an ankle holster. It's not perfect solution, but it definitely is better than having nothing, because the best gun to have in a gunfight, Thad, is the one you got on you. It's not the one you wish you had, or it's out in my car. What do you have? That's the best one you're going to have today.
Yeah, good point. Well, thank you very much, Rich. What about in closing? Would you like to talk about anything else, or sum anything up for us?
No, Thad, thank you for what you do and getting the word out there, and these great Americans that you've had on your show. And, just letting people know that there are men and women out there that keep the wolf away from the door. And right now, as you and I sit here in our cozy, warm houses, there's some American man and woman out there on the forward edge of freedom that are curled up and it may be freezing cold. And let's keep them and their families in our thoughts and prayers tonight.
Certainly. I appreciate that. And thank you for serving our country, and also for being in law enforcement. I actually don't think I've had another LE on my show. I think you're the first, and I had some other questions I wanted to ask you about that, but we'll save that for another time, I guess, because God bless the men and women in blue that just don't get the support they deserve either.
Yeah, and when I got out, and we could talk about it next time, I went into the Red Cross and did disaster relief work with the Red Cross, and because I believe that a life spent in service for me, and this is just Rich Brown, is the way I wanted to live my life. And if I could serve my country and my community, either as a humanitarian with the Red Cross or out there, putting a bayonet to our nation's enemies, that's what I wanted to do with this one life that God gave me.
Yeah, well, you've done it, and you're doing it, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Thad.